Okay, so we're now live. This is an update. The government, the Scottish government, that is, has decided to remove the temporary rent control increases. Now, here is the word of warning you have to be watching, what you have to watch. Just let me explain what's going on here. The government has contacted the Scottish Association of Landlords to advise that it will be withdrawing the temporary restrictions on rent increases at the end of March 2025. Now, these restrictions allow tenants on most tenancy types to challenge a rent increase through the rent officer or the tribunal, with a tapered formula being applied, which can restrict the level of rent increase allowed. Now, for more information on finding out what that tapered formula is, you can contact us direct and we'll be able to give you information on that. But there's a lot of information online about this taper formula already. If you type in Scottish Government rent controls taper formula, it'll come up on the Scottish Government's webpage anyway. Now, given the government's recent approach to the sector, the private renting sector, this is actually quite surprising. And while it's a welcoming announcement, the devil is in the detail here, and let me just explain in a wee while. Just let's get this out of the way first. It does mean for any rent increase notice is issued after the 1st of April 2025, ironically, the 1st of April, April Fools. They're going to backtrack. After the 1st of April 2025, an appeal to the rent officer or the tribunal by the tenant would result in the rent being set at the open market rent. In other words, if your rent was £500 a month and the market rent was £750 a month, after the 1st of April 2025, if you put your rent up to £650 a month and the tenant appealed to the rent assessor to actually get that adjudicated to see if that's fair or not, the rent assessor will automatically set the rent level at £750 a month, the open market rent, not the £650 that you're trying to get. So it means basically that the tenant, unless it's less than unless it's more than open market rent, there's no point in actually challenging the rent increase itself. However, landlords still have to be mindful of the fact that the affordability level for the tenants themselves, and the majority of landlords do that anyway, including ourselves. The government is still intending, though, to actually intending to introduce permanent rent controls in the future. And there is a housing bill going through at the moment in Scotland, through the Parliament, the Scottish Parliament, at the moment to bring these into force. For more information, you can refer to SAL. Now, I will actually put their link in the bottom here in the comments in a wee while. Actually, I'll maybe just find it now. For more information, refer to SAL. News article here. Here we go. On this bill, and I'll just post it so you can see it in the comments right now. Here we go. That should be whizzing its way to everybody that's watching this right now. That link to there. But it basically says it's unlikely that rent controls introduced through this new legislation would actually come into force until 2027. Now, let me just explain to you the devil in the detail here. The rent controls going through and the proposed rent controls going through just now are seeming to exempt certain groups of private landlords. One of them being the build-to-rent landlords, the new landlords, the build-to-rent landlords, the ones that are building specifically for rent. In other words, they're building 600 at a time, big, massive units in Glasgow and Edinburgh and all over. The corporate, more or less the corporate people are actually doing it, building on mass scale. Now, rent controls, let me just say, if they're trying to exempt these people to build these, and I could understand why they're doing it, because they want them to build and they don't want a control over them, it doesn't really go in line with the legislation of being controlled rent then, because these landlords will historically be, in years to come, the highest rents possible, because they will have to charge an absolute fortune in the very beginning. So it doesn't exactly make it very affordable, exempting and fair for the tenants, a tenant exempting the corporate landlords and the build-to-rent landlords from rent control legislation. Who's it targeting? It's the rent control legislation purpose is supposed to help the tenants, and it's supposed to target landlords charging the most rent. It's unaffordable. So why would they then exempt a sector of people who would actually charge the highest rents? Is that the spirit of the legislation then? Let me just explain who's next. I think there's a possibility that the student lets will be exempt as well, because that'll affect university students and affordability, and landlords actually doing that and will disrupt their education. So there's another group of people actually with historically high rents, because student lets are usually historically high, getting exempt. Does that go in the spirit of the legislation? I have to ask that. Maybe you can answer that. The next one is when you look at the MMR, which is mid-market rent. Mid-market rent is supposed to be defined so far, and it hasn't been defined. But I know, and you know, if you look up mid-market rent right now, it's supposed to be a housing association's rent on affordability levels for people that are not vulnerable, but they're earning between 20 and 30,000 pound a year. And the mid-market rent is housing associations who are meant to be competing against private landlords. So there's a move to exclude mid-market rent, but they've not been given any definition for the actual legislation itself. But now, mid-market rent is housing associations only. But if housing associations only are charging more and they're competing against private landlords, but some of them will be charging more than what a private landlord might be charging, then why would mid-market rent again be exempt if it's the tenants paying more? Because remember, the legislation is to control rents for the benefit of the tenant. It seems, on the face of it, that the legislation so far seems to be excluding every preferential group the Scottish government want, and actually specifically only really is targeting the private sector landlords with only one or two properties, which accounts for 250,000 plus people in the whole of Scotland. Is that really the spirit of the legislation of rent controls, to target a group rather than actually help the tenants? I'll leave that question to you. Maybe you could stick something in the comments. But anyway, feel free if you want to share this with someone else in another group or anything like that. But hopefully we'll get some clarification on what the mid-market rent legislation is, because I am writing to the Housing Minister at this moment with the help of Willie Rennie, because he is my MSP, to get the answer to that question. And several other questions as well about the spirit of the legislation, and is it actually helping tenants, or is it just targeting landlords? But only you could decide. Bye for now.